Hello, welcome to another Bibble IT training video. This is for the Windows 7 Microsoft exam 7680, section 2, module 4. Today we're going to be completing our deploying Windows 7 section by having a look at VHD files. So first of all, we're going to cover what are VHDs, what different types of VHD files you can have, how you can create them, and some of the clever things you can do with them, such as direct booting them and servicing them offline. So first up, what is a VHD file? VHD files are Microsoft's full drive emulation file format, much in the same way as VMware has their VMDK file. A VHD is a single file that lives somewhere on your file system that can then emulate an entire drive inside itself. So that can be mounted up by the relevant software, be that Hyper-V, be it Windows 7 itself. And it will contain its own partition tables, its own files, folders, all those sorts of things, just as you'd expect if you attached a second hard drive into your system. VHD files can be used as a backup format by certain programs. The Windows 7 system image backup that you can do in certain editions, that will actually create you out a VHD file. Also, if you've ever used any of the Microsoft virtualization platforms such as Virtual PC or Hyper-V, VHD is the file format for any hard drives attached to your virtual machine. Something that's new in Windows 7 is the ability to directly attach a VHD into your system so that it shows up just the same as a normal drive. So even if your VHD file is being loaded up from somewhere else on the physical disk, you will be able to attach it into Windows, and Windows will see that you have two drives. You can also convert WIM files into VHD. There's a special script that Microsoft produced that will let you do this. However, I'm not going to cover that in this module because it's not supported officially by Microsoft yet. So there's three different types of VHD files that you can have in your system. You've got a fixed VHD file. The fixed VHD, if you've created a VHD file on your system for, say, a 20 gig hard drive, what that's going to do is it's going to create you a 20 gig VHD file, and it's going to block all of that out so that as far as the host operating system is concerned, you've got a big 20 gig file sat there. With a dynamic VHD file, it creates, even if you do your 20 gig file, say you're only using 2 gigs of that, it will only create a 2 gig file, and then as you go through and fill that up, it will expand as required. That's a dynamic VHD. With differencing, you can create a relationship between a parent and a child VHD. So if you've got your original parent VHD, which has your clean Windows 7 installation on it, and you then want to go ahead and test some applications, you can create a differencing disk, which when you boot up and start messing around with everything, you're making your changes in here, leaving your original VHD file intact. So this is file number 1, and this is file number 2. What that then means is when you're finished with this second disk, you can go ahead and destroy that, get rid of it, and you've still got your disk 1 all intact and ready for you to go back to. This is a similar technology if you've ever come across the idea of snapshots in virtual machines. Okay, so how to create and attach a VHD. Two main ways you do that. One using the built-in disk manager as part of Windows 7. The second one using a command line tool that we've come across already in part of this series using diskpart. So the first way, if we open up Computer Manager and then go into Disk Management, you'll see here I've got one physical drive in my system as well as my CD drive, and that's 126 gig partition here. On the Action menu, I've got the option to do Create VHD. It's going to ask me whereabouts I want to store that. So in my case, I'm just going to go onto my desktop, into my computer. I'm going to make a new folder called VHD. And this is going to be VHD 1. I'm going to make this a dynamically expanding drive because I don't want to fill out 20 gigs worth of space, which is the size I'm going to set this to be. With it being dynamic, I don't want to automatically go and write 20 gigs worth of file down on my hard drive. I want to make it dynamically expanding, so initially the file will be very, very small, and then as I start using it and filling it in, it will grow. That does also mean that even though I've only got a disk size here of 126 gig, I could set my VHD file to be 200 gig if I wanted. I just need to be very, very careful that I never actually went up against that limit, because otherwise I would fill this entire drive here. So we're just going to leave that at 20 gig and go ahead and create our VHD file. So if we have a look on the computer in C VHD, you can see here I've got my VHD file that's incredibly small at the moment, only 42K. And what Windows has done is it's actually gone ahead and mounted that for us here. Now it's not initialized, so this is the same as if you'd plugged in a blank hard drive, physical drive into your system. What I can do is right click, initialize the disk, and set it up with some partitions. Okay, so now that's initialized and I've got it online, I can go ahead, create myself a new partition, and I'm just going to do E VHD drive and finish. Okay, that's now finished, and you can see in here I've now got my VHD drive showing up in exactly the same way as a physical hard drive would. If I take some stuff off my system, let's have a look, what can I copy? Say my user state migration tools, if I copy them and paste them into my E drive, so it's about 40 megs worth of stuff, I think it is. You can see I've copied in there. If I go and have a look and see VHD, and can you see now that this is starting to expand as required, so it's now 100 meg. It's worth noting that with dynamic VHD files, if I now went and deleted all the stuff off that drive, that won't free up any space back in my original VHD file. That will still be taking up 100 meg. It's just next time I copy 80 gigs worth of things onto the drive, it won't necessarily use up more space on my actual hard drive. So I'm going to go back into the device manager and I'm going to detach that VHD just by right clicking on it and detaching. Okay, so the other tool we would use to do this is called diskpart. So if I run an elevated command prompt and then run diskpart. So first thing I want to do is create my VHD. So I'm going to do create vdisk file equals c/vhd/vhd2.vhd. So it helps if I give it a few more parameters there. Sorry, I should say you also need to give it maximum and then a size in megabytes. So I'm going to give it 20 gig again, and I'm also going to say that type is expandable. And that should have created in the same way as I had my original VHD file. I've now got another 20 gig expandable VHD that's initially 42K. So now I can select my file, so select vdisk file equals c/vhd/vhd2.vhd. Now I've selected it, I can attach it, but this time I don't have to specify which VHD because I've already done that in this step here. Oops, attach vdisk. Okay, now I'm going to create partition primary and then assign letter E. And we should now have a blank drive attached to our system if we look in here. It's still a raw partition because I haven't actually formatted it using diskpart, but Windows has popped up saying something's appeared. Do you want to format it? Yes, we do. And off it goes. So that's now our second virtual drive. And again, we've got our 78K file. It's gone up there because that's all the partition information and everything that's been written into the disk, which has caused it to grow. And then to detach it, we do detach vdisk. And that's now disappeared. So that was the two ways of mounting and unmounting our VHD files. I glossed over a few of the commands in diskpart there just because they're the generic diskpart commands that we've already used earlier on in some of the modules for things like how to create partitions. The ones you need to remember for this, create vdisk and then a file name, and also you need to specify maximum and a type. Maximum is obligatory. If you don't specify a type, it will default to you using a fixed length VHD. So if you say 20 gig, it will write out a full 20 gigs worth of stuff on the physical hard drive. Then we need to select our vdisk and then you can attach it or detach it as necessary. So one of the clever things you can do with Windows 7 is you can actually directly boot into a VHD. This is really handy if you've got some software that you need to test but you don't want to ruin your main work PC or home PC, you can, with the bootloader native to Windows 7, attach a VHD file, copy whatever files you need onto it, and then set up your bootloader so that it will dual boot between the virtual VHD file and your normal main hard drive. The files or the commands to do this are quite complicated. The built-in Windows tool is bcdedit. First thing you need to do is copy your current bootloader and give it a new description. So this will be Windows Virtual Instance or something along those lines. That will then create a GUID for you. From there on in, you use that GUID in the rest of the commands. So you need to set then the GUID device, tell it that it's a VHD file it's going to be booting from, and then specify a path. It's worth noting the strange syntax here. You have to put square brackets, drive letter, square brackets, and then the path. You also then need to do OS device and then the same format for the second bit. You then need to tell it to redetect the HAL the first time that it turns on. This is because the hardware is likely to be different from the time that you installed it. And that should be everything you need. Two extra commands that you've got here for bcdedit. /v shows you a verbose list of all the bootloaders that you've got set up on your system currently, and /delete will let you remove any of these entries if you've messed them up by mistake. To show what that looks like, if we hop back into here and exit disk part, and then I'll move that up out of the way. If we run bcdedit, you can see here this is a write out of all my current boot partitions, or boot devices, sorry. So at the moment I've got one here set for C drive, and that's the path for where Windows is, and the description is just plain Windows 7. So all I need to do to create another one, copy, and then current, then description, boot. So you can see now this is my GUID. So what I'm going to do is copy that to the clipboard so that I can use it in the rest of the commands. So we want bcdedit /set, then our GUID, then device VHD equals c:/VHD/VHD1.VHD, and then same command again, but this time instead of device, we're going to do OS device, and then bcdedit, we need to do a HAL, and that should be ready to go. So if we do bcdedit again, you can see now I've got two entries in here. I've got my main Windows 7 with the normal system path and this partition, and then I've got a second one here which is my VHD boot, which is going to be set to boot from that VHD file there. So at this stage, if I actually rebooted the machine, even though I've got the entry to boot from VHD, bear in mind that that file is currently blank. You would have to install Windows onto that. That's where it comes in quite handy, being able to convert a WIM file into a VHD, or you would need to install Windows directly into that. It's worth saying at this point that Microsoft don't officially support the installation of Windows into a VHD, so you would have to deploy the WIM file into the VHD, much as we did in the previous module where we were deploying a captured image using the ImageX tool. Okay, so last but not least, there's this idea of being able to service or do offline servicing on a VHD file. Because a VHD is basically a virtual hard drive, which is normally used in virtual machines, Microsoft actually produced a solutions accelerator called the Offline Virtual Machine Servicing Tool. Currently this is at version 2.1, however version 3 is in beta at the moment. This does require System Center Virtual Machine Manager to work, or SCVMM. What offline servicing lets you do is it will boot up your virtual machine, or boot your VHD as a virtual machine, on a maintenance host in your virtual machine cluster. Well, that means that it won't affect any of your production virtual machines. You can then boot it up, and it will allow the machine to talk to a WSUS installation or to a System Center Configuration Manager installation if that's what you use in your enterprise for patching. It lets the machine stay up long enough so that it will download and install any patches, and then it will turn your virtual machine down. Turn it off, sorry. You can see in businesses where you've got lots and lots of virtual machines, all with different VHD files that might be sat waiting to be deployed and converted into production machines, or if you've got a lab type scenario where you've got machines that are off for long periods of time, that it's quite handy having this ability to keep machines up to date, so that when you actually have to turn them on and use them, you don't have to sit and wait ages at a time while things go through patch, update, apply, shut down, reboot, all that sort of stuff. So using offline servicing, it means that machines can be ready to go pretty much straight away. Offline servicing is not something I'm going to actually show you working or go into in any great detail, because it's something that, although Microsoft state in the requirements for the exam that you should know about how to do offline servicing, it's really something that falls into the virtualization exams rather than the Windows 7. I think for the purposes of this exam, all you need to know about is that you're able to do offline servicing, what the tool is that lets you do it, and that it requires System Center Virtual Machine Manager. So that brings us towards the end, I think. Quick summary of what we should have learnt today. VHD, I think I've probably laboured the points. That's a virtual disk format versus a WIM file, which is a file-based imaging format. VHDs contain full disk information, everything you'd expect to find on a physical drive, so stuff like the partition tables, drive headers, all those sorts of things. Windows 2008 R2 as well as Windows 7 has native support for VHD files, meaning you can mount them directly inside Windows without having to have any third-party tools. You can do that using Device Manager or Disk Manager, or using DiskPart tool. You can directly boot into a VHD file. Something I didn't mention at the time, actually, if you're running Windows XP or Windows Vista, as long as you upgrade your bootloader on your machine to be Windows 7, you can then boot up into Windows 7 if you wanted to give it a test to see if you've got full compatibility with your system. Also, something I didn't mention before, that booting into Windows 7 from VHD is only supported on Ultimate or Enterprise editions of Windows. VHD files, WIMs, can be converted into a VHD, and you can also service them offline. So sorry, I know this one's been slightly garbled. I hope everybody's got the point. If there's any questions or comments, please feel free to leave me some messages in the feedback on the website. That's at www.bibble-it.com. And thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our operating system deployment section for Windows 7.